There is a kind of an urban legend that Ronald Reagan is singularly responsible for homelessness in California. Right? That he closed all the mental hospitals, shoved everybody out on the street, and it's all his fault. There is a little bit of truth in that, but mostly not. This happened in about 50 states, so we can't blame it on Ronald Reagan, who was governor of California. It happened for largely well-intentioned reasons. Newspapers exposed really grotesque abuses of mentally ill people who were confined in state institutions in poor conditions for their whole life, sometimes because their husband wanted to get rid of them, or their family was tired of their uproarious teenager. Those were real abuses, but they were not necessarily widespread, and we threw the baby out with the bathwater. We ended up, in California, actually there was a very enlightened law passed bipartisan. Our Republican legislator from La Cañada, Frank Landerman, and a Democrat from some other part of the state, they had a wonderful vision that actually works in many other countries, most notably in Italy, of community clinics, like literally where families could take their family members home in the evenings, but get some relief by having clinicians and walk-in services. The Landerman-Petras Act really envisioned that. Where Ronald Reagan has a little bit of responsibility is in the budget crisis that he inherited, he did not fund that. So there are some Landerman centers around the state, but instead of 500, there are 50 or whatever the numbers are. So there is a reality that some people are mentally ill before they become homeless. But as we heard from Ann, there are also a lot more people who suffer mental illness symptoms because of being homeless and because of the trauma of doing that. But the good news is that belatedly, after many years of effort in Sacramento, two major pieces of legislation have changed the landscape. They haven't changed the reality yet, but they have changed the landscape around mental illness. The first is around conservatorship. There has been a very difficult path for families who have schizophrenic children or who have a brother-in-law, out on the street that they're trying to help. It was crawling through glass and under barbed wire to bring them into care. And that has been changed now with the pilot for care courts, which are just starting in 5 counties, but Los Angeles will be one of them soon. And that is to give constitutional protections so people aren't just shoved away for the rest of their life in a state mental hospital, but allows either family members or the county or whatever, for people who cannot care for themselves to be put into treatment and to be stabilized. That is a pilot. It could go very badly in a couple of cases and blow up in the media and then get killed, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. But if it begins to work, it will offer a ray of hope for some of these people who are out on the streets and who really need to be brought into care, and who present, whether in reality or in perception, a very disturbing trend. None of us want to see people who are deeply disturbed walking down our street. We are compassionate about it, but we're also afraid of that. And that's understandable. And folks who cannot take care of themselves need treatment. The other is a change in the definition of gravely disabled. Lieutenant Aklufi, you can address 5150.
So interestingly, we often say, like, in police officers, we are absolutely not social services workers. Pretty much the one thing that we do that even resembles social service is that we're one of the few groups of people that are able to place individuals on like a 5150 hold. So we can take them into protective custody. and transport an
For
individual.
those that don't memorize the penal code, 5150 is?
I will get to it.
Okay.
So it's the 5150 is the Welfare and Institutions Code for a 72-hour hold. And basically it's only in 3 circumstances. You're a danger to yourself, you're a danger to others, or you're gravely disabled. Danger to self and danger to others, fairly easy to articulate. Oftentimes the people that we come in contact with, the reason why we're contacting them is because they've had some kind of violence that they've been involved in, or some kind of self-harm. But the third one, the gravely disabled, has been a real challenge in the past, because depending on who you were talking to on the other end of this, you know, when we take them into an emergency hospital, you know, the decision about whether or not the person was actually, you know, meets the threshold for gravely disabled, I have to admit, you know, we see someone who is, you know, literally looking in trash to find food, they're not wearing adequate clothing, and, you know, they may not even be oriented entirely, and to me, that would be a no-brainer for gravely disabled, and we would actually have trouble getting doctors to admit them based on that, because the person found food and they had clothes, you know, I mean, so there you go. But changing the definition to make it easier to get people to some kind of help under that particular part is huge for us, especially since a lot of the population that we were dealing with that fell under gravely disabled were elderly in general, and really truly, you know, not in a position to be able to take care of themselves out on the street.
And the other tangible good news is that a federal lawsuit has been settled by the County of Los Angeles, and they had previously made commitments to add 3,700 additional psychiatric beds, because there's been a severe shortage of those beds in our county. And the lawsuit settlement obligates them to 3,000 more on top of that. So in the next 3 years, the county is obligated to add 6,700 very much needed beds. There'll be a challenge to staff those beds, but that is a big step forward. And the city of Pasadena deserves credit. Mayor Gordo has spearheaded an effort to acquire a site, many of you have read about this, at the old Kaiser facility on Lake and Villa. It's a little vague on what exactly that will turn into, but the city and county have purchased that with the idea of a community clinic that would offer mental health services, not solely to those who are unhoused, because there are other mental illness issues in our community that we want to prevent becoming homeless. And there's potential for some kind of transitional housing there as well. That will be a challenge to see that through, because the city and the county will have to work together and fund it and work with the neighborhood to make sure that we're not creating a detriment to the surrounding businesses and residents. But all of those things add up to some potentially good news on this very tough issue of mental illness. Obviously, we're not going to address in depth all of these issues. If there's some more questions, I do want to move on to the third area so we can have more opportunity for you to actually stand up and make your points or ask questions. And that third area is the area that I think is the greatest opportunity for us to do more with what we already are committing. Because that's one of the frustrations that folks tell me about, is we're spending all this money and the problem's getting worse. What can we do to make the problem better? And so that's the whole issue of our system, and how do we improve the system.